Hello and welcome to Math Tape 054 in RCC's Math Tape series, Multiplying and Dividing Rational Numbers. We're going to work first with multiplying, and then when we conclude that, we'll work with dividing rational numbers. As you watch the tape, be sure to take very careful notes. At any place that you don't understand something, or at any place where you try an exercise I shall give you and make a mistake, mark it so that you can ask help from a tutor or a lab instructor when you go to the math lab. Let's begin by looking at notation. Recall that multiplication is indicated by several different notations. The most familiar one, perhaps from your elementary school days, is the cross mark. Multiplying A times B is written A cross B. This is the symbol that we use on calculators and on some computers. Another multiplication symbol is a raised dot, A times B. Notice that the dot is in the middle of the line, not down on line like a decimal point, a raised dot. We also use parentheses to mean multiply. The parentheses can be around the A, the first factor, around the B, the second factor, or around both factors. And the most economical way to write multiplication with two letter symbols is simply AB with no symbol between them. You would think that we could figure out a single way to multiply without having to have so many choices. But if you stop and think about it, each of these has some advantages. The cross mark we keep because of calculators, some computers, and because it's easy to write down as a multiplication symbol when we're doing multiplication with one factor below the other. The dot is very quick. We can write 3.5 with very little effort. Thinking about 3 and 5, if we wrote 3 and 5 with nothing between them, that doesn't mean multiply anymore, that means 35. But with letters, this is by far the most economical way, and it's the preferred way for people working with algebra. Parentheses mean many different things in mathematics, and often we have to work out something within parentheses. For instance, we might work out some expression inside the first parentheses and get a result of, say, 3. Maybe it began as 5 subtract 2, for instance. And then the parentheses sitting beside the next digit would say to multiply without having to rewrite the symbol, another symbol for multiplication. As you work through algebra, you will discover that each of these symbols is used quite a bit, except for the old familiar cross mark. In algebra, we use letters to stand for variables, and the cross mark greatly resembles the letter X, and therefore can be very confusing. So we will rarely, if ever, use the cross mark unless we're writing something like maybe 356 times 291, and we want to put the cross mark beside the lower one to indicate that we're multiplying by hand. Let's now observe some patterns in multiplication. We'll start with 3 times 2. Certainly we know that 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 0 is 0. Notice the pattern that we're getting. 3 times 2, 3 times 1, 3 times 0. The second factor is going down by 1. The answers, 6, 3, and 0, are going down by 3s. That means that the next thing in our list should have the first factor of 3, and then 2, 1, 0, negative 1 should be next, and 6, 3, 0, going down by 3 each time, we should get negative 3. That means that 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. A positive factor times a negative factor gives us a negative product. Now, when we're multiplying two numbers, we can switch the order of the numbers without changing the answer. For instance, 5 times 4 is 20. 4 times 5 is also 20. It doesn't matter which one you write first. Therefore, negative 1 times 3 must be negative 3. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Look at the pattern. Negative 1 remains unchanged. The second factors are 3, then 2, then 1. We should get 0 next. The products, the answers are negative 3, negative 2, negative 1. Notice they're increasing by 1 each time. So if we go up by 1, we should get 0. And sure enough, negative 1 times 0 must be 0, since any number times 0 is 0. Then the next one should be negative 1, 3, 2, 1, 0, negative 1, and negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, positive 1. So that tells us that negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. So we've got examples of the different combinations of signs. If you multiply 3 times 1, you get 3. A positive times a positive gives you a positive result. If you multiply 3 times negative 1, you get negative 3. A positive times a negative gives you a negative result. If you multiply negative 1 times 3, you get negative 3. A negative times a positive gives you a negative result. And if you multiply negative 1 times negative 1, you get positive 1. A negative times a negative gives you a positive result. This leads us to the two rules that summarize the patterns that we've observed in these examples. When you multiply two numbers that have the same sign, positive times positive or negative times negative, the answer is positive. When you multiply two numbers that have different signs, positive times negative or negative times positive, the answer is negative. So here are the two rules. Copy these carefully and make sure you get every detail correct.